Please welcome Suki Sandhu to QueerTWENTY, the cohort of 2021. Suki is the founder and CEO of Audeliss and Involve, both working towards ensuring diversity and inclusion at every corporate level. Thank you so much, Suki, for joining us.
Great, no, thank you for having me. Really good to see you.
So, Suki, for the first question, when we approach intersectionality, and we know that it is inherently different between the West and the East, the way we approach pride in the UK or the US cannot be the same as when we approach pride in India. Could you highlight some key differences?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's also remembering that West and East are diverse in and of themselves in terms of as regions. So we've got to remember that the political landscape, the economic landscape, and the legal framework varies considerably across the two regions. So it's great now, obviously in India, that you now have equal marriage, but that wasn't always the case. And there's been a lot of work going into getting that into India, whereas obviously we've had that in law now for at least, I want to say, 6 or 7 years in the UK. So it's just trying to make sure that we're aware of where the regions are on the spectrum to then tailor the solutions for those areas. And there's also a difference around the openness of culture. So in coming out, well, first of all, being LGBT plus and then being Indian is going to be more difficult coming out in India than it is coming out in the UK, because culture, religion, class even plays a part, particularly in India, as that's more prevalent than it is in the UK. And then recognizing obviously things like gender and sexism is very different across the regions, particularly if you're comparing UK and India, and just making sure that we're looking after the needs of all women and taking an intersectional approach.
Thank you for that, Suki. So, keeping that in mind, you have been working in the business ecosystem for a while now. So, for you, what are the 3 major changes that you have seen with respect to diversity, hiring, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think things like intersectionality is the buzzword or the word of the moment, I would say. And what intersectionality means is making sure that you are working across demographics. So gender, race, ethnicity, LGBT plus, disability, etc. And that's been a big focus to make sure that they're including as many communities as possible. I think allyship has been quite a huge change in business, in the fact that allies are people that protect and are intentional about supporting people that are different to themselves. So that could be men helping women, straight people helping LGBT plus, white leaders helping racially diverse communities. And that's been a huge focus and necessary to drive inclusion. And then data collection has been a big thing. So companies getting much better at collecting data so they can actually inform what strategies they want to implement in their businesses.
No, you're absolutely right, Suki. I think data collection is one of the most crucial things that has set India back in their attempt towards inclusionary growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're not collecting data, how do you know where you stand at the moment with different communities, what their issues are, and then how do you then tailor the solutions to them? So we always start with data in Involve when running a diagnostic for a business to get a sense of, well, what are the employee engagement surveys saying? What kind of focus groups do we hold with their diverse communities to get a sense of what they're saying? And then bringing that all together to then paint a picture of how inclusive a business is. But data is central to tackling the issue.
This gives me a beautiful segue into the next question. As the founder of 2 organizations, Involve and Audeliss, how do you switch contexts effectively?
So Audeliss and Involve are 2 separate businesses. Audeliss came first over 10 years ago, and that was to tackle representation. So almost like the diversity box, the tip box, and trying to put senior diverse leaders into boardrooms and leadership teams. Involve arrived 2 years later to tackle inclusion. So how do we ensure those leaders that we're appointing into boardrooms and leadership teams feel like they belong? And so that's when Involve was created. But then we support employees at all levels in Involve. I suppose that's the inclusion side. So that's why the two are separate but complement each other really well.
So clearly some duties do overlap, but then do you ever maybe prioritize one over the other, or do you make sure that there are strictly separate spaces that you work in?
Well, I mean, because I'm the founder and CEO of both, it's interchangeable. Like, I'm representing both brands when I go and speak to business. So I'm not really one or the other. So it really depends on what the purpose of that meeting is. Like, if it's a general discovery meeting, then we need to understand what are their challenges. Is it a hiring challenge, which in that case we'll introduce Audeliss? Is it around engagement and motivation and inclusion issues? Then we'll introduce Involve. But I don't find it that hard. And I've got an amazing management team below me that are really great at representing both brands.
So are you thinking about venturing into the global south, maybe opening a branch here in India?
Not right now, I would say, but I mean, I do sit on the board of Outright Action International, which is based in New York, an LGBT plus NGO with access to the UN, and that largely focuses on the global south. And then I also launched a fund called the Suki Sandhu Asia Fund to support queer activists in Asia. So although I'm not doing the representation and inclusion side, I'm helping, I suppose, on the LGBT human rights side instead, which I think for me personally is more important.
Since you brought up the Global Fund and your efforts towards accelerating human rights, I wanted to ask you, how do you come to terms with the privilege that you have and how do you pay it forward?
Yeah, really good question. So I think we all need to recognize we all have privilege, regardless of where we are in the world and what we're doing. So to make it real for some of the people that might be watching, I know some of my privilege, first of all, is being a man. I've got privilege over a woman by knowing that I can walk down the street late tonight and not worry about who's walking behind me or ahead of me and worried about fear about getting attacked, for instance. I know that I've got privilege over, say, the Black community as a brown person, because what we learned with Black Lives Matter and the protests from last summer is how awful the situation is for Black people in all aspects of life. So recognizing that as a brown person, I need to step up and be a better ally. So for me to pay it forward, I like to think we're already paying it forward through the work we do in Audeliss and Involve, because I've been able to match purpose with profit. But obviously additional things, I sit on the board of Outright, I set up the fund for Asia, I'm a patron for AKT. I think it's really important to be involved and donating your time to causes. And also, if you can, all these organizations that champion causes to close that privilege gap or on certain issues, they all need money. It's why I set up the fund. Like, it's very nice writing an email and putting a post on social media, but they need cash. They need cash to do things. So I try and raise as much money as possible for the charities I support, and try and encourage people to give if they can, because not everyone can give, but if you can, you must.
Thank you, Suki. So, talking about the pink economy, what is the business case for inclusive executive leadership? Now, I would like to narrow it down a bit, because we do know the diversity refers to people with disabilities, equality for all minorities, people of lower caste, people of color, etc. But then for you, specifically for LGBTQ inclusion, what is the business case?
Yeah, so there are lots of different reasons, and I can run through them quickly, but this business case is quite well rehearsed. So firstly, heightened performance. So racially and ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to perform better. Cash flow improves when companies are more diverse. Executive teams that are highly gender diverse are 21% more likely to outperform with regards to profitability. Inclusive companies are more innovative. There's also questions around agility in terms of why it's important. So organizations with inclusive cultures are six times more likely to anticipate change and respond more effectively. But it's ensuring that with the business case, it's not just the statistics, it's about making it a reality in your organization. It just requires diverse talent at the top and diverse thinking and strong leadership.
You said that it is rehearsed. Maybe on this platform, would you like to say something which you usually don't say it in your scripted answers?
Well, I mean, it's not that something I don't normally mention, but I would say with LGBT plus specifically, there is a really good statistic that people that are openly out in the workplace are 32% more productive. So not having to change the pronoun of your partner, not having to hide the photo of your partner on your desk, you're able to think on the task at hand because you're being authentic and not having to hide who you are. And that's something that I personally experienced in my earlier career, where I didn't feel I could come out. I didn't feel I was successful enough. I felt like I was going to be judged. I hadn't come out to my family yet. And it kind of made me work harder, I suppose, but it also made me realize like the weight that's lifted when you do come out. And remember, coming out is a really personal thing. Like no one should come out if they don't feel it's safe to do so, or they feel like they're not ready. So for me, I felt I was in a good position. I was really successful in my job. And from my perspective, I was like, well, if they reject me, at least I'm still number one at my job. So who cares? Like no one can say anything to me. And I think giving people the confidence and courage to do that is really critical. And that's why creating the environment where you can be yourself is really important. Like having even just like the rainbow flag on your email signature or your pronouns on your Zoom to show that you're inviting other people to share their pronouns is like an inclusive way of doing things.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for pointing that out, Suki. And since we're on this topic, what about you? What is your support system? How has that evolved since you decided to come out?
Yeah. So my coming out story is interesting because I remember, and also we're coming out every day. Coming out doesn't stop when you tell your family or when you tell your friends, because I'm coming out in every situation or scenario that I'm in when people learn that I have a husband, for instance. And so I came out, first of all, to my sister, because I thought as soon as I told someone in my family, and this was also probably about 17, 18 years ago. So the landscape for LGBT plus people in the UK has changed significantly from then to what it is now. So it's still quite a difficult time to come out. And my sister was, me and her are really close. So she was super supportive from the beginning. She started crying because she was worried about how my mum and dad would take it. And we were figuring out how we would do that. And then, I don't know what it's like in most Indian families, the mum is the one that tends to know everything. So the mum was the first person I told. Probably a few years after that when I was in a serious relationship, because he's German, he was going to move to London. And when he was away, my mum came to London to visit me for the weekend. And we'd planned that we'd watch we'd do sightseeing, and then we were going to watch this Hindi film called Dostana, which has that gay theme to it, thinking, well, let's watch it. And at least that will bring up the subject of being gay, and then we can talk to my mum. We did a full day of sightseeing. My mum was knackered. We had dinner and she was like, right, I'm going to bed. So we were like, God, how are we going to show the film like mum's gone to bed now? So in the morning, it was a really awkward, emotional, tearful conversation with my mum. My sister helped broker. And my mum was obviously in tears. She was really upset, didn't quite understand it. She thought that I could take some pills and I'll be okay. The doctor can fix me, all those kind of things, because she just didn't know enough about it. She's not been exposed to gay people. But then if I roll forward to now, like my mum is like the biggest supporter and advocate, and so is my dad. With my dad, I wrote him a letter because I couldn't bear telling him in person. So my brother gave him the letter, and my dad's reaction was like he's always known. And he was more concerned about what my mum's reaction was going to be, but he didn't know that my mum already knew. So she was actually okay with it by the time my dad found out. And now they love my husband. They see him as a son. Me and him have been together for 16 years. So yeah, it's all really, really positive. So I feel really fortunate. I feel really privileged that I've got that support network. And my friends have all also been fantastic. If anything, my friends were too easy. If anything, there weren't enough tears and there weren't enough tantrums. They were like, yeah, we already knew. Let's move on. And I was like, why is no one angry or crying? So yeah, I've been really lucky.
I'm glad you had that kind of support, Suki, but then I really do want to ask you, speaking from the point of view of your parents, they were first generation immigrants. So in some way, do you think that their concerns were double-edged? For example, they had to already fit in as immigrants, and now they're also concerned about non-normative identities and fitting it from that point of view. So what do you think their primary concerns were?
Yeah, I mean, my mum's concern was straight away like, well, are they going to have grandkids? Am I going to get married? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm definitely going to get married, but it just won't be to a woman. And with grandkids, no, I'm not going to give you grandkids because I don't want any kids, regardless of being gay or straight. And you've got 5 nieces and nephews now. You don't really need me to give you any more. So they're totally okay with it. And I think, like you say, them coming to the UK to raise us, we are raised in a British culture. Now, I'm not saying British culture is like celebrating LGBT plus and so inclusive, but it does mean there's a different way of living. So my dad, who probably is more British than my mum, has probably been exposed to our community, does know what being gay means. And I find that with sons and dads, the dad always tends to take it a lot better than the mum for some reason. And with women coming out or non-binary, it's the dad that takes it really bad. The mum seems to be okay about it. I don't know if there's any research about that specifically, but just anecdotally, what I've heard from friends, that's kind of what I've heard and listened to.
Absolutely, Suki. So, as one of our final questions, LGBTQ representation in politics is still globally nascent. Does this indicate that inclusion is still mostly superficial, especially for those in power?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd say politics generally tends to drag behind society. So yes, in some countries where LGBT plus representation in politics isn't always a reflection to society at large, but I do think visibility remains really important. So role models are really key. So we are seeing more and more representation of our community in politics, but again, depending on where you are in the world. So that geographical diversity is really important. But I think as a community, we need to be more engaged in politics so that we don't take our rights for granted. I mean, we've seen it in places like a first world country like the US, where they only just implemented federal protections for LGBT employees across the US last year or the year before. Prior to that, I think about 20 plus states could fire someone for being LGBT. And we've seen anti-trans legislation introduced into the US in certain areas. So we have to always be engaged, figuring out what policies and laws might be impacting us and making sure that they don't reverse. That's the key thing. So we have to use our influence to drive global change. And what support can we give to our brothers and sisters, for instance, in places like India, to support them? And I think with the marriage equality bill, for instance, there was a lot of support from what we learned about how we did it in Europe and certain countries to drive the change in India. So I think working together is really important.
Thank you so much, Suki. Thank you for being a part of QueerTWENTY. Thank you for coming here and speaking to us and sharing your insights with us. And we really do hope you and all your future endeavors all the best.
No, you're so welcome. Thank you for including me. And I honestly will celebrate it and cherish it. So thank you.